What's up, everybody? This is Fred Ricciani of TSC News right here at MNN2, presenting you guys with part 2 of our interview with WrestlingObserver.com's Bryan Alvarez. We're also going to preview the upcoming WWE Backlash pay-per-view featuring Randy Orton versus, of all people, Jinder Mahal. But first, let's talk a little bit more about Backlash from a historical perspective. And when it comes to historical perspectives, that means random, useless, potentially useful facts from our buddy Scott Anderson. WWE Backlash Facts. What have you got for us this week?
All right, Fred, we got Backlash just a couple days away, so here's some cool facts for you. This pay-per-view actually started back in 1999 as part of the WWF at the time In Your House pay-per-view series, if you remember that. The main event to that particular show was Stone Cold Steve Austin defeating The Rock way back in 1999. Backlash, it was an annual pay-per-view. It was held from 2000 until 2009. Of course, it returned last September as part of the WWE brand split, brand extension, becoming a SmackDown-only pay-per-view, reverting back now this year to the end of April, early May spot that it had back in 2000 to 2009. Back in Backlash 2003, it was the in-ring WWE debut of Bill Goldberg. He defeated The Rock. 2006. This was a little controversial what happened here, but Vince McMahon decided, let's do this great storyline. So they had a match. It was Vince and Shane McMahon. They teamed up and defeated the quote-unquote team of Shawn Michaels and God, if you remember that.
Oh, God, no pun intended.
No pun intended. 2007, history was made once again. Vince McMahon became the ECW champion as himself, his son Shane, and Umaga defeated Bobby Lashley in a 3-on-1 handicap match. We'll go back 2002. Hulkamania was reborn as he defeated Triple H to win the WWE World Title.
Scott, as always, thanks so much for the time. Keep being phenomenal. That's Scott Anderson. He is he's something else. And speaking of something else, we've got the second installment of our Bryan Alvarez interview. For those that don't know who Bryan Alvarez is, he is one of the men that run WrestlingObserver.com, the popular combat sports website. He is the founder of the Figure 4 weekly newsletter and the author of Death of WCW, in addition to a number of other job titles. Broadcaster, podcaster, former gymnastics coach, former pro wrestler. He's also a trainer in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Pedro Sauer. The list goes on, and I could sit here and talk about Bryan's accomplishments all day, but I think it's better if we hear from him. Now, unfortunately, we got to start off on kind of a somber note. As you probably know, there were a ton of layoffs at ESPN. I mean, there's been layoffs the last couple of years there, but this one in particular was about the guys that are on the air, the girls on the air, laying off a ton of people, I think up to 100 people. They're looking to make a lot more cuts, and a lot of reasons for why they're making the cuts. And one of the main reasons, I think, is the skyrocketing TV rights for sports. People are wondering when the bubble is going to burst. The NBA getting paid a ton of money by ESPN, NFL, MLB, and as an observer, no pun intended, of pro wrestling and mixed martial arts, do you think the state of ESPN is a bad omen for WWE and UFC, who are looking to get a raise in TV rights in the next couple of years?
Well, that's a loaded question right there. The thing with ESPN or the USA Network or Spike TV or whatever channel it might be, I mean, right now, if things are bad for USA Network, you could argue that, well, man, things might be bad for WWE because, you know, USA Network is paying them and WWE's deal is going to be coming up. I think it's in 2018, 2019, and they're obviously going to want the same or more money. And if things are rough at the USA Network, I mean, who's to say they're going to make the same? They could do considerably worse because things are rough. But the reality is, if things are rough for the USA Network and WWE is one of their highest rated properties, it could actually be better for WWE. Same thing with UFC. I mean, if ESPN is having difficulties and they're cutting on-air staff. They're making all of these cuts. I mean, if they have a property, if UFC is a kind of property where they think, you know what, man, it's a lot of money, but if we bring UFC to ESPN, I mean, this is really going to help the all of ESPN as a whole. I mean, then things might be good for UFC. So it's hard to say. I mean, my guess is with WWE, and it's impossible to say. I mean, the last time that WWE came due, Vince McMahon basically, I mean, he kind of promised that they were going to double their rights fees. And so they didn't. Now, they did increase their rights fees, and they signed a deal for escalating television rights fees. So basically every year they're making more than they were the year prior. It has nothing to do with the ratings. Like, the ratings could tumble every year, and WWE is still going to get paid every year more through the duration of this contract. So they didn't double their rights fees, though. So for this next contract cycle, I mean, if you look at the ratings for WWE from 2014 through today, they signed their last deal in 2014. I mean, they are not doing better today at all. I mean, they're down double percentage points. I think they're down something like 29% since 2012 when they went to 3 hours, but they're certainly down. But it's still one of the highest rated properties on cable television. I mean, outside of like the cable news networks, I mean, WWE does good numbers. Not what they used to do, but they're doing very, very good numbers. So even though they're so far down, I mean, my guess is they're going to get the same or better the next time around. As far as UFC goes, I mean, UFC may be in a better place because they're with Fox now. ESPN is hurting. I mean, you could conceivably have a bidding war between ESPN and Fox for UFC. You may even have a bidding war between, I mean, I think it's less likely, but ESPN and the USA Network. I mean, theoretically, you could have some sort of ratings or some sort of rights fee battle between those two. I don't know how much ESPN would want WWE. You never know. I mean, it is a very highly rated property, so it's tough to say. So much changes over the course of a very short period of time in the television business. I mean, it's not just ratings, but there are people cutting the cord. I mean, that's really what's affecting ESPN more than anything is people cutting the cord. So we're still a couple of years away, so I can't even make a prediction right now. I guess the only prediction I would make is I think that WWE and UFC, especially WWE, I think they're going to get the same deal or better the next time around, even though the Raw numbers are so far down, and maybe UFC as well. But it's very difficult to say.
Do you foresee a near future, where the likes of Hulu, Amazon, and Netflix get in the mix?
It's certainly possible, but I know everybody likes to talk about cord cutting and Hulu and these over-the-top services. But I mean, the reality is cord cutting is, I mean, it is a factor, especially with ESPN. I mean, there are people cutting the cord, but if you look at the number of people that are still just watching television, I mean, like, to me, if WWE lost television and they went to Hulu or some sort of streaming service or a Netflix, I mean, they're way better off with television still to this day. So it could happen, but I mean, even like Lucha Underground, which is another wrestling company that was on El Rey, I mean, they signed a deal and their first season is now available on Netflix. And I know that a lot of people thought this was going to be a big game changer and it's on Netflix and all this and that. I haven't heard anybody talking about Lucha Underground since they got on Netflix. It's been, like, I think it was mid-March they got on there. It's been well over a month now. I mean, I don't hear anybody talking about it. I don't get it. I never get emails by people going, oh, my God, I just discovered Lucha Underground on Netflix. I mean, that doesn't happen. So professional wrestling in particular, and I'm sure UFC as well, it's still got to be on national television, on a good cable channel. Like, there was way more buzz about Lucha Underground when they were on El Rey than when they got on Netflix. And El Rey is in, you know, a few 100,000 homes were watching Lucha Underground on El Rey. So you've got to have, to this day, to really be successful, you've got to be in a very strong cable network. Otherwise, Netflix, Hulu, even these smaller cable networks, it's not enough.
How long did it take you to actually make a living doing what you're doing? Was there a point in time where you finally were able to say, you know what, I can do this full time if I wanted to?
Well, I would say that, even today, here's something. When I was probably, I don't even know when, it was probably the late 90s. I think in the late 90s, I was making enough that I could survive. And that's about it, survive. And I remember asking Bruce Mitchell of The Torch for his advice. And he said, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, don't quit your day job, not just because it's an extra source of income, but because people that devote their lives full-time to pro wrestling oftentimes go crazy. And so I don't know if that's why, but like there has never been a time where I did not have another job that didn't have to do with wrestling. And it has nothing to do with making, I could have survived only on wrestling in probably mid to late 2005. When we finally went online, we started getting a lot of subscribers and the overhead was low, and I could have survived just on pro wrestling. I could have done better than survive. I would have done okay with just pro wrestling in 2005. But even then, I always had another job because it's true. Like, if all you're doing is pro wrestling, like, you're going to go a little bit crazy. I'm not saying like you're going to go like nuts, but I've always found that it's always good. Like, after a day of dealing with all of this pro wrestling insanity, I can go teach jiu-jitsu kids class and like I feel great afterwards. Like, I don't think about wrestling the whole time. I'm having fun. I'm playing around. I'm teaching the kids some stuff. I come home and I'm refreshed. And so I could make $1 billion and I would still always want to have like a second job where I'm just not doing wrestling. I'm doing something that's not wrestling and I'm being like a normal human being. So I'll always have that. But the answer is, it started in late 2005 when we went online. And then, from that point forward, it's only grown every year since.
You had Growing Pains starting the newsletter, eventually became very successful, and then you transitioned online in 2005. What were some of the challenges you had to overcome back then?
Well, the newsletter, like I said, I could survive on the newsletter, but by 2005, if you know anything about the news business, this was like the big switch. Like, everyone stopped reading newspapers, they started going online. Everyone stopped reading magazines, they started going online. And it was the same thing with the newsletter. Everybody was going online. And I was sitting with my brother-in-law one day, and I said, like, what could I do here? Like, if I wanted to do something online, like, could I do an email newsletter? Because I knew then, like in 2005, I was 30. I was 30 years old and I was struggling. And I was thinking, dude, I'm looking at the rest of my life. Like, I can't survive the rest of my life like this. But the way that this is going right now, I got to do something. And so he said, well, so I thought, why don't I make an email newsletter and I won't have to print, I won't have to pay for postage, my profit margin will be higher, and I can hang on doing this for a while. And he said, it'd be a lot easier if you just made a website and people would sign up and you put your newsletter online and then people would just log in and read it. And don't send an email, just put it online. Have a subscription website. He knew about other subscription websites. So I thought, okay, let's try it. And we did it. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, like a bunch of people are signing up. And then the whole turning point, like, I was doing better online because the profits were higher because the overhead was lower, but I still wasn't like doing great. And so then he said, I can't remember who came up. I think my idea was, what if we did like hotlines, I called them, or you could do a podcast. And I was like, what's a podcast? Because there were virtually no podcasts at that point. And he goes, well, it's like a hotline. It's kind of like a radio show, but people can listen to it on their iPod or whatever. And I was like, dude, this is some high-tech stuff here, this technology. So he set it up. And of course, I wanted to be in radio anyway because I'd done Sports Byline, but I was a big fan of Art Bell, and I'd been doing Sports Byline over the phone. So now was the opportunity to like get a microphone and get a mixer and actually do like a radio show. And we set up a little studio. We recorded it. We put it online, and like everybody loved it. And then it was like, And so then we started pumping out podcasts like crazy. And we were one of the first wrestling podcasts. It was actually available on iTunes. And what we basically did was we would do a show every day, or like 5 days a week. I don't remember what the schedule was, but once a week, it would be free on iTunes. And we would plug the members area. So if you wanted to hear the show free, or you're just looking around for wrestling on iTunes, you'd find our podcast. You could hear one a week for free, or you could go sign up and you could get a daily podcast. And then explosion. We were off and running. And that was the beginning of everything, really. That was the whole thing that turned everything around was iTunes and the podcast.
We'll be back with the last part of our Bryan Alvarez interview in just a moment, but as we mentioned at the top of the show, WWE Backlash is just a couple days away, and if you watch this now, if you watch this show a couple days from now, chances are we could have a new WWE champion in Jinder Mahal, a guy who literally has won like 5 matches over the course of almost a year. 5 matches. And he could be the next WWE champion. Poor Randy Orton. Win or lose, he goes on to WrestleMania and wrestles in maybe the worst WWE title match in history, which featured holograms of worms, maggots, and crickets. Then he goes on to WWE Payback and faces Bray Wyatt in a House of Horrors match that was horrible. On top of the fact that a refrigerator fell on top of him. And then magically, he gets to the arena 25 minutes later in San Jose, California, where a half hour ago it was super dark, but in real life it was actually daylight. He comes in, he's magically clean-shaven, he's magically got different undergarments. Guess that's the power of film or being the Viper Randy Orton. And then he gets beat up by Jinder Mahal again, has his title stolen, and Bray Wyatt just beats him in a non-title match. And now he goes into his first major title defense post-superstar shakeup against Jinder Mahal when you have AJ Styles, Kevin Owens, and Luke Harper on the freaking roster. I know Randy Orton has accomplished a ton in his career. I know he's got money for years and years to live off of for the rest of his life. But man, oh man, I'm sure there's a part of him that says, I'm happy I got this title. I'm happy I'm getting this paycheck, but what in the heck am I doing in this damn ring? Also in MMA news, EA Electronic Arts confirms that EA Sports UFC 3 will be released in the first quarter of 2018. But right now, we got no time for games because we're going to go back to Bryan Alvarez for the last part of our interview. Now, you are your own boss, but the other boss of WrestlingObserver.com is, of course, Dave Meltzer, the founder of the Wrestling Observer. You guys eventually joined forces. Was that a no-brainer at that point because you guys had worked together for so long, or did you guys both have reservations because you both are guys that are used to being your own bosses and calling the shots?
Well, yeah, but the way it worked out was in the early 2000s, like 99, 2000, 2001, there was a WrestlingObserver.com. And it was a very primitive website, and you could sign up I can't even, honest to God, I can't even remember how it worked, but you could read the Observer on the original Wrestling Observer website in the early 2000s. And long story short, it was a disaster. And so when I went online in 2005, I mean, immediately I was like, Dave, you want to do this together? And Dave had serious reservations because he remembered the disaster of the original Wrestling Observer website. And so he was not down with the idea. You know what it was? There was an Observer website, but I took the newsletter online and started doing podcasts. And he did not want to bring the Observer online because of the disaster from the early 2000s. So we both had websites at the time, but mine was the one where we did the podcast and we put the newsletter online for subscribers. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep it a free website with like a daily update that would push people to get the print copy. That's what happened. And so I kept saying, let's merge these together. We'll put the Observer online. You can do the podcast with me. We'll do the whole 9 yards. And he didn't want to do it. So basically what happened was for 3 years, I went it alone. And after 3 years, it was successful enough that he realized, you know what, this will work. And that's when we merged. So that was the timeline.
And one thing I really like about your whole site is that I feel like it's a family affair. Of course, your brother-in-law, runs the back end, all the technological stuff. Obviously, you have yourself, and you and Dave are practically like brothers. But even before then, you have one of your best friends, Vinny and Craig. You do a show with them. What was the intention going in when you started podcasting that you kind of wanted to bring in some of your closest friends and kind of make everybody feel like a part of your family, or did that just kind of happen organically?
I mean, it was never designed for, I only want people that I know and my friends and family to work here. I mean, my brother-in-law was, he was very, listen, I know if you go on our board, you're going to find people that are critical of the website and Tony and this and that. But the reality is he has been the best person for the job. And I know that there are going to be people who hear that and go, oh, well, you could do this or you could do that or you could do this. I mean, I've looked at this website from 2005 until today, and I try not to compare it to other wrestling websites or this or that. I mean, we're trying to make the best website that we can in a very, very, I don't even like to compare it to an ESPN or another sports website. I mean, a pro wrestling subscription website is unlike anything else. And he's done an exceptional job over the last 12 years, turning it into what it is today. That's why he's there. My grandmother, I had her on one show because I wanted to review a book that I didn't want to read, and everybody thought she was hilarious, and so now she's been here for 10 years. Vinny was my best friend. We wrestled, and I thought, hey, you know what? I'll get Vinny on here. And Vinny he thinks he's horrible, but Vinny is awesome at his job. That's why he's still here. And, I didn't grow up with Filthy Tom or Mike Sempervive. I mean, they were people who, Mike had done a show for us dating back to like 2006. And I remember I needed a fill in for Observer Live, and I called him, and he did a great job. And so he's doing it to this day. And Filthy Tom, we did a couple of shows with him, and he's great. And so he's doing it to this day. So I'm just looking for people that I think do a great job, and that's it. And a lot of them happen to be friends or family, but a lot of them happen to be people that started out not friends or family, but they're friends and family today. So there's never been any intention to do anything. It's just who's worked and who hasn't, and that's what we're with today.
Well, Bryan, it's definitely been a pleasure talking to you all this time. Before we let you go, what's one piece of advice you give anybody that hopes to have similar success that you've had in any industry?
You just gotta keep going. That's it. Like you gotta keep going. That's it. Like if I were gonna write a book, how to succeed in any endeavor. Like, you could open it up and it would say, just keep going, and that's it. That's the whole thing. Like, there's going to be ups, and there's going to be downs, and there's going to be roadblocks, and there's going to be challenges. But if you keep going, you'll get there. And it's kind of like, it's one of the reasons I love jiu-jitsu, too. Like, you can't just keep going like this and just smashing your head on something. I mean, if you're heading for a roadblock, like there's something in your way, you can't just do this. Like if you're trying to start a business or you're trying to succeed in something and you're doing it and you keep running into something and you keep going like this, I mean, eventually you're going to quit. So the whole key is, well, how can I get around that? You know, can I do that? Can I do that? Can I do that? How can I get around it and then keep going? And then you keep going and then this happens again and you have to think of a way to do that. And then you keep going. That's all it is. It's just keep going. And sometimes you'll have an intention. Sometimes you'll want to end up in a certain spot, but you'll end up somewhere totally different. And as long as you're cool with it, there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's not a failure to, I wanted to be an author. That's all I wanted to do when I was a little kid is I wanted to be an author. And eventually I wrote a book. It was harrowing. Okay. Second only to witnessing childbirth. It was harrowing. And I really don't have any desire to really write another book. But I wrote the book, and where I ended up was podcasting and doing radio. And I love it with every ounce of my being. I love doing pro wrestling and mixed martial arts radio. I don't sit back here and go, well, you know, I wanted to be a writer, but I wrote one book and I never wrote another one. Great. I didn't want to. I moved past that, and I found it, and I just kept going, and it's led me to this point. And now all I'm going to do is keep going. And I'm sure that at some point I'll run into another one of these, and then you just try to go around it and just keep going, and everything will be fine.
Wise words from a wise man. Bryan Alvarez, thanks so much for the time. Much appreciated. Thank you all so much for watching TSC News on MNN2. If you want more, it's simple. Go to youtube.com/thesportscourier, click that subscribe button, and you'll be able to get all our videos, including all episodes of TSC on MNN on demand. You can also check out the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play. You name it, we got it. Follow us on Twitter at SportsCourier, at TSC News on Instagram, Facebook.com/thesportscourier, and stay tuned over the weekend on YouTube for our in-depth WWE Backlash pay-per-view recap, which may feature news about a, dare I say, new WWE champion. But until then, tweet us, Facebook us, do what you gotta do. Until next time, everybody, as always, enjoy the matches.